Hey everyone! On June 7, 2026, a ceasefire that had held for nearly 100 days collapsed. Rockets hit northern Israel. Israel struck Beirut. Iran launched ballistic missiles directly at Israeli air bases for the first time since April. And by the morning of June 8th, the Strait of Hormuz, the single choke point through which 1/5 of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas travels every single day, was under effective Iranian blockade. 10 to 11 million barrels of oil vanished from global markets overnight. Not from a refinery fire. Not from a pipeline rupture. From a geopolitical decision made in Tehran that removed more daily supply from the world economy than the entire output of Iraq. The International Energy Agency called it the largest energy crisis in history. And here's the part nobody is connecting. The same week the strait closed, Corpus Christi, Texas broke every oil export record in American history. The same week global markets went into freefall, Texas was pumping crude onto supertankers bound for Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and Italy, at a rate this country has never seen before. The same week New York's budget deficit was widening, and New Jersey was watching its corporate base evaporate, Texas was becoming something the world had never quite seen before: the indispensable economy. The one place on the planet that every other economy needed, all at the same time. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how a military escalation 7,000 miles away became the most powerful economic accelerant in Texas history. You are going to see the specific infrastructure, the pipelines, the terminals, the liquefaction trains, that made Texas the only economy capable of absorbing a global energy shock of this magnitude. You are going to understand why the Cushing storage crisis is the number that should be on the front page of every financial newspaper in America, and is not. And you are going to see how the same geopolitical forces that are draining blue state economies are simultaneously turbocharging the Sun Belt in ways that will compound for decades. There is a name I want you to write down: Kent Britton. He is the CEO of the Port of Corpus Christi. What he said publicly on June 8th is the single most important economic statement made in America this year. We are going to read it together in about 12 minutes. Pull up the timeline, because the sequence of events here is everything. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury against Iran. 900 missiles in 12 hours. Air defense systems, military infrastructure, command structures. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is killed in the strikes. The region is pulled to the edge of total war. By April 8th, a fragile ceasefire holds. The conflict enters its 100th day with the Lebanon front still active and Hezbollah rockets still crossing the border intermittently. June 7, 2026. Sunday. Hezbollah fires rockets into northern Israel near Yiftach. The Israeli Defense Forces respond with heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah command centers in Beirut's southern suburbs, the Dahieh district. Iranian officials declare that Israel has crossed every red line and launch a direct ballistic missile wave at Israeli air bases. The first direct state-on-state exchange since April. The ceasefire is over. June 8, 2026. Monday. Israel strikes targets in Isfahan, Karaj, Tabriz, Tehran, and the Karun petrochemical facility in Mashhar. Yemen's Houthis renew missile attacks on Israel and issue threats against civilian shipping in the Red Sea. And the Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile-wide choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, through which the oil exports of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar all must pass, goes under effective Iranian blockade. The financial markets registered the shock within hours. The Nasdaq dropped 4.18%, its worst single-day loss since April 2025. The S&P 500 fell 2.64%, ending a 9-week winning streak. South Korea's Kospi fell 5.39%. West Texas Intermediate crude jumped 4.5% to $94.70 a barrel. Brent crude surged nearly 5% to $97.70. And those numbers, dramatic as they are, do not capture the full structural severity of what just happened. Here is what the strait closure actually means in physical terms. The Strait of Hormuz handles somewhere between 20 and 21% of global petroleum liquids trade every single day. Roughly 17 to 18 million barrels of crude and refined products. Another 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas supply moves through the same 21 miles of water. When Iran blockades the strait, even partially, even temporarily, The volume of energy that disappears from global supply chains in a single day exceeds the total daily output of most OPEC member nations. ADNOC CEO Sultan Al Jaber, the head of the UAE's national oil company, made the timeline explicit. Even if the crisis ended today, restoring Strait traffic to 80% capacity would take at minimum 4 months. Full capacity restoration would not happen until the first or second quarter of 2027 at the earliest. And that timeline assumes the military situation stabilizes immediately, which, as of June 8, 2026, it had not. The shipping data makes the structural problem concrete. More than 200 tankers are currently trapped inside the Persian Gulf, unable to transit the strait. Those tankers are carrying approximately 160 million barrels of petroleum. That is not new production. That is existing supply, already pumped, already loaded, sitting on the water unable to move. When and if the strait reopens, those 160 million barrels will flood the market simultaneously, creating a temporary price relief that will mask the underlying supply deficit rather than resolve it. OPEC had already agreed to increase production targets by 188,000 barrels per day for July 2026. That increase is irrelevant. The production exists. The transit does not. You cannot move oil that cannot leave the Gulf. Now let's talk about what all of this means for the one economy that is positioned to absorb every single one of these shocks. Because while the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the Gulf of Mexico is open. While Iranian tankers are sitting in the Persian Gulf going nowhere, American supertankers are loading at Corpus Christi around the clock. And while Asia and Europe are in emergency procurement mode, trying to replace the supply that just vanished from their import portfolios, there is exactly one country with the production capacity, the export infrastructure, and the logistical network to partially fill that gap: the United States of America. And within the United States, the single most critical node in the entire system is a port city in South Texas that most Americans could not find on a map 6 months ago. Let's talk about Corpus Christi. The port of Corpus Christi handles approximately half of all American crude oil exports. Not a significant share, approximately half. In the first quarter of 2026, before the June crisis even began, the port processed 54.5 million tons of cargo, its most intense quarterly performance in history. In March alone, 19.9 million tons moved through the facility, and daily crude exports exceeded 2.4 million barrels. Those numbers were set before the Strait of Hormuz closed and before Asia and Europe entered emergency procurement mode. The numbers being processed right now, in the immediate aftermath of the June 8 escalation, are higher. Now let's talk about the infrastructure that makes those numbers possible, because this did not happen by accident. The capacity that Texas is deploying right now to absorb a global energy crisis is the product of years of deliberate, capital-intensive investment that was built specifically to position Texas as the world's swing supplier. Enbridge's Ingleside Energy Center, located directly at the port of Corpus Christi, just completed its Phase 7 expansion. That expansion added 2.5 million barrels of new storage capacity, bringing the total to 20 million barrels. The facility can now load crude at a rate of 200,000 barrels per hour. It can fully load a very large crude carrier, a supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of oil, something most export terminals in the world cannot do. Enbridge's Ingleside facility alone handles roughly 25% of all U.S. Gulf Coast crude exports. It is not a port. It is a global energy hub. The Gray Oak Pipeline, which connects the Permian Basin, the most productive oil field in American history, directly to the Corpus Christi coast, just completed a capacity expansion that brought it to 1.02 million barrels per day. That means crude pulled from the ground in West Texas moves through a dedicated artery directly to the tankers loading for Japan and South Korea, without touching a single bottleneck. The Permian Basin is producing at record levels. The pipeline capacity to move that production to the coast now matches it, and the terminal capacity to load it onto supertankers now exceeds it. Cheniere Energy completed Train 5 of its Corpus Christi liquefaction terminal in March 2026, 3 months before the crisis. That completion added more than 10 million tons per year of new LNG export capacity. LNG exports from the United States are now running 36.8% above prior year levels. Every molecule of that additional capacity is heading to Europe and Asia, partially replacing the LNG supply from the Persian Gulf that just became inaccessible. Cheniere did not build that train in response to the June crisis. They built it years in advance. The crisis simply validated every investment decision they made. This is the moment Kent Britton steps into the story. He is the CEO of the Port of Corpus Christi. On June 8, 2026, the day the Strait of Hormuz closed and global markets went into shock, Britton made a public statement that should have been on the front page of every newspaper in America. He said, "Our customers are massively overproducing to fill the void created by flows that are no longer permitted through the Strait of Hormuz." Read that sentence carefully. Not producing, overproducing. The Permian Basin operators, the midstream pipeline companies, the terminal operators at Corpus Christi, they are running at maximum physical capacity right now. Not as a strategic choice, as a response to a global emergency that removed their primary competition from the market overnight. Now let's talk about the money. Because when an economy becomes the indispensable supplier for a global emergency, the financial flows that follow are extraordinary. American crude oil exports hit 5.6 million barrels per day in May 2026, an all-time record at that point. In some weekly data, the number hit 6.4 million barrels. Those export volumes, at $94 to $97 per barrel, represent roughly $500 million to $600 million in daily export revenue, flowing into the American oil and gas sector. The vast majority of that revenue flows through Texas. Through Permian Basin operators, through midstream companies, through terminal operators, through the banks and law firms and logistics companies and equipment manufacturers that support them. All in Texas. And here is where the story connects to everything happening inside America's borders right now. Texas is not just absorbing global energy demand. Texas is simultaneously absorbing the corporate headquarters, the financial firms, the manufacturing operations, and the high-net-worth individuals that the high-tax blue states are driving out. Goldman Sachs is building a $500 million campus in Dallas. J.P. Morgan now employs more people in Texas than in New York. 57 Fortune 500 companies are now headquartered in Texas, more than any other state in America, more than California for the first time in history. ExxonMobil just severed its 144-year legal relationship with New Jersey and re-domiciled to Texas. Samsung abandoned a brand-new New Jersey headquarters after 8 months and moved to Plano. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is not creating Texas's economic advantage. It is compounding an advantage that was already building. Every petrodollar flowing into Corpus Christi right now is a dollar that strengthens the fiscal foundation that allows Texas to maintain zero corporate income tax, zero personal income tax, and the legal infrastructure that keeps attracting the companies that New York and California keep pushing away. The geopolitical windfall and the domestic corporate migration are not two separate stories. They are two inputs into the same compounding equation. Now I want to talk about the Cushing problem, because this is the number that should be terrifying every energy analyst in America and is not getting the coverage it deserves. Cushing, Oklahoma is the pipeline crossroads of the world. It is the physical delivery point for West Texas Intermediate crude futures contracts, meaning when you buy or sell a WTI futures contract, the actual oil behind that contract is stored at Cushing. It is the central node of the American oil distribution system. And since the beginning of the Iran conflict, American crude oil inventories have declined for 6 consecutive weeks, a total drawdown of approximately 63.9 million barrels. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve sits at 357 million barrels, near its lowest levels in decades. But the number that matters most is not the SPR. It is Cushing. As of the end of May 2026, storage at Cushing had fallen to 22.4 million barrels. That is down 4 million barrels since February. And the operational minimum, the level below which the physical system begins to break down, is 20 million barrels. Here is why that 20 million barrel floor matters. At the bottom of those massive storage tanks in Cushing, there is a layer of what industry professionals call gunk: water, sediment, low-quality residual material that accumulates over years of operation. When tank levels fall to the operational minimum, the remaining petroleum is no longer the clean crude that refineries are designed to process. The powerful pumps that move oil through the pipeline network cannot reliably push that degraded bottom layer. Commodity economist Matt Smith has been explicit about this. If Cushing falls below operational minimums, WTI physical delivery grinds to a halt. Midwest and Gulf Coast refineries go short on feedstock, and American consumers see pump prices spike in a way that has nothing to do with global markets and everything to do with a domestic infrastructure failure. America is currently 2.4 million barrels away from that threshold. The strait is closed. Global demand for American crude is at an all-time high. Cushing is draining. The math running in the background of this crisis is not comfortable. This is the death spiral in its most literal form, not the political death spiral of blue state budget deficits and corporate departures, though that is running simultaneously. The physical death spiral of a supply system being drawn down faster than it can be replenished, toward a floor that, if breached, produces consequences that no amount of strategic reserve releases or emergency OPEC agreements can quickly reverse. The Strait of Hormuz will eventually reopen. The ceasefire will eventually hold. The tankers sitting in the Persian Gulf will eventually transit, and the 160 million barrels they carry will eventually reach the market. But the timeline the ADNOC CEO laid out, 4 months to 80% capacity, 2027 for full restoration, means that every week between now and then, the global energy system runs on American supply, Texas supply, Corpus Christi supply, Permian Basin supply. And when the crisis ends and the strait reopens and the petrodollar windfall eventually normalizes, Texas will have spent another year building the infrastructure, accumulating the capital, attracting the corporate relocations, and strengthening the fiscal foundation that makes the next windfall, from the next crisis, or the next corporate departure, or the next billionaire relocation, even larger. That is not luck. That is a compounding structural advantage being built deliberately and systematically, while the states on the other side of the ledger are still arguing about which billionaire's penthouse to stand in front of on tax day. The receipts are in the export data, the pipeline filings, the terminal capacity reports, the Cushing inventory numbers that the Energy Information Administration publishes every Wednesday. The math is public. It just keeps running. If you want to understand where the next $1 trillion of American capital is going to be sitting 12 months from now, and based on the infrastructure investments, the corporate filing patterns, and the geopolitical supply dynamics currently in motion, the answer is already visible in the documents. Subscribe before you scroll. The next video is the case file. The numbers are already public, and by the time the mainstream press connects the dots, the capital will already have moved. The strait closed. Texas opened. The rest is arithmetic.